and gentlemen, let me welcome you on a side event on Triangle Climate Action, harmonized effort on businesses, NGO, and the government. My name is Vladimir Hetzel. I will moderate the side event. I'm coming from the UNFCCC Secretariat Technology team. We get linked within this initiative through our technology needs assessment project, where Lebanon is a very active country in coming from technology needs to engaging all possible stakeholders and coming to actions and benefit for the country in terms of technology. They have a very nice comprehensive story behind the implementation of the technology needs. And this is, I believe, a good opportunity to get informed how it's possible to come with such a process which in this case was under the UNFCCC to concrete benefit on a country level, and how various stakeholders which are key in implementation process can collaborate amongst each other. And this is why we've been very pleased to moderate this side event and also being present on this information sharing. I'm now going to introduce the speakers. On my left is Mr. Vahan Kabakian from Ministry of Environment, from Climate Change Office. He's a climate change advisor to the Office of Ministry of Environment and head of Lebanese delegation participating in the climate change negotiation. Next is Dr. Nadine Farella. He's coming from Issam First Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. He's a director of the Climate Change and the Environmental Program. And he's involved with many interesting stories, which is one is talking about application on energy, water, energy, food nexus, very actually actual topic, also in Europe, heavily discussed. And here we're going to speak about relationship between industry research and the climate and what we can learn from it. Next one is Mr. Bernardo Salas. He's a team leader of Climate South, which is a European project. And we learn further on this initiative. And Mr. Salas actually joined the European Commission in 2009 and focused on disaster risk reduction and climate change. And he was in charge of Global Climate Change Alliance. And the last one is Mr. Yamil Bonduki, our colleague from UNDP. He's working in low emission capacity building program. And we engaged before a lot with Mr. Bonduki also as a secretariat, as he was also engaged in a technology needs assessment on behalf of UNDP. So I think we have a nice combination of speakers here. Maybe we start with presentations and a little bit of introduction. First, what also resulted in the technology needs assessment was a Lebanon Climate Act, as this is actually connecting economic growth and addressing climate change challenges, which is very interesting initiative, which actually have a communication part, engagement, civic engagement, business growth for companies, visibility and networking. And it takes private sector as a serious partner, which is a challenge in many countries to connect mitigation and adaptation activities and the private private sector businesses to not only connect but to make incentive for private sector to be involved. This is actually also issue within the process of UNFCCC. So let me maybe start with Bakan to ask you about the process, how the Lebanon Climate Change Act was born, what was behind it, and the roadmap of its implementation.
Thank you, Vladimir. Good evening, everyone. Since the Paris Agreement came into force, everything was done. We had our NDC prepared, and then the challenge was practically how to implement this, how to make sure that this is being implemented as much as possible. Obviously, the government has a certain role to play, but then it took us, we realized that there's a big role of the private sector in implementing the provisions or whatever we have in our INDC. So we were discussing things with different stakeholders, and the Green Mind NGO came forward with an idea of collaborating together in creating something called Lebanon Climate Act. It's a platform for private businesses to join. So we were just, throwing our ideas how we could move forward with this and how big or how small it should be. We launched it around mid-June of this year, and we realized that this is something quite unique in the region. We had over 110 private businesses from, banking sector, from the hotel sector, from industries joining this call. We didn't want to make this just a greenwashing. Therefore, we came up with a certain roadmap that we labeled it Business Knowledge Platform. It practically provides tools, so training divided in quarters over a whole year to those companies that are interested in taking further their pledge or their act. So no, they are part of the Lebanon Climate Act. So we started developing together 4-step tools, beginning with identifying the carbon footprints of the company itself. And then the next step would be a 3-month period with cliniques, webinars to help them in preparing that information, but also in looking at their process where they could actually take actions to reduce emissions, or actions that would require or help in building resiliency in their process. The third option would be in assessing if they would either be able to do that. So would they be able to actually do such a thing within their business? But also we realized that sometimes it would be better to also give them the option of working with another NGO who is or who will implement climate mitigation or climate adaptation actions. So that was the other part of the Lebanon Climate Act when we decided also to involve different NGOs that might be interested in taking such actions. So the platform practically provides a set of options for the business, either to take action within their premises and or provide financial support to NGOs that in turn they would act and implement climate mitigation or climate action.
Thanks. As I understand, each company will set actions to reduce, let's say, its environmental and climate footprint. And do you have any experience looking from the demand side? How will these actions, whether these are actions in mitigation, it can be in energy whatsoever, or in adaptation, agriculture, water, health, any other sector, how they're going to be chosen or selected by these companies, and what is possible range of these companies also, maybe what can be engaged actively in that act?
We've already done our technology needs assessment in the country. And we do have a set of priorities in terms of mitigation technologies or actions and adaptation sectors for actions to be implemented in. And the whole idea of giving the option specifically for the companies to go for working with an NGO, and we primarily scope down the possible actions that could be implemented to the results of the technology needs assessment that we've done. So specifically when it comes to mitigation, obviously it's energy related. So anything that would reduce energy demand, but also produce energy from decentralized systems within their premises. And the other sector in terms of mitigation was and still is the transport sector. So again, if they could actually, take action within the transport portfolio of their business. And in terms of adaptation, obviously, and this is where the role of NGOs might be very prominent, are the agriculture sector and also water conservation sector, which are the priority sectors identified under the technology needs assessment.
Thank you very much. Next presenter is Mr. Bernardo Salas, I already mentioned, and he's leading another very, I think, interesting and both important initiative in the Mediterranean. As you know, EU projects are normally creating consortia of countries to collaborate on a certain topic and issue. And he actually heads a project with 9 South Mediterranean countries. It's called Climate South. It's getting together Algeria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Tunisia. And the project was initiated, Bernardo, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I know, it was 2013, and it has some 4 years of implementation with a budget of some 5 million euro. And actually, it connects stakeholders from technical government department, from UNFCCC, focal point decision makers, local government. And actually, the objective of the project is to assist with transition of partner countries towards low emission economies and enhance climate resilience. This, Bernardo. How is this initiative special? Maybe for you. I know from your resume, you have experience from least developed countries and also smaller and development state. Now, what is this initiative unique, let's say, for you and for others? And what would you recommend to maybe other countries in the region and also outside, how it can be replicated, what you're doing, and how they can benefit from a similar activity?
Thank you, Vladimir, and good evening, everybody. As said, my name is Bernardo Salas, and I'm the team leader of the project Climate South. As justly indicated, so it was all perfect, your summary. It's an EU-funded project with 5 million, and it works what is called the South Mediterranean region in the neighborhood policy of the EU. So all the countries from Morocco up to Lebanon. The focus of the project is quite broad because it covers its technical assistance towards low carbon resilience and low carbon development and climate resilience in the area, therefore, of mitigation, adaptation, climate finance. So basically, you name it, and it can be done through Climate South. The project works at the regional level and the national level, and one of the areas is also the mainstreaming of climate change into different sectors of the partner countries. And indeed, the question is, why is this rather a special, this initiative, is that we were looking for initiatives or means to support the mainstreaming of climate change into the private sector. And that was in some months ago. We were in Lebanon, and it's always a pleasure anyway to be with the Lebanese friends, always a big pleasure to work together. And we were reflecting on this, and then they came up with this, said, but look, we have the solution for you. We've already prepared what you want to do. And they told us about the Lebanon and the Lebanon Climate Act. And indeed, it was, I mean, it was right on the spot. It was the perfect thing that we thought should be brought forward. The Lebanon Climate Act is really a good means to bring the private sector into the climate action. And we know that without the private sector, it's very difficult to have meaningful action in climate change, or lasting action in climate change. And what also struck us was the solution-oriented and very practical approach of the initiative, with this activity spanned over a number of months, with seminars, with a sort of webinar, homework, although I wouldn't say homework because then it looks a bit scary and it's something like you're obliged to do better. But I mean, there's a continuous follow-up to start the process and not dropping it. So on a step-by-step assistance for private business to understand what climate change is, how it impacts its business, how the business can impact on climate change, and how to work out a strategical approach to the issue, which is both meaningful in terms of climate relevance and economically sound. So it was exactly the thing we were looking for, and we said unique because in fact we couldn't see, or as far as I know, there are no other initiatives such as this one. Another key feature, which is I think is quite important in this initiative, is the fact of bringing together different actors and shaking ideas and coming up with new stuff. I was at the side event here yesterday. Like most of you, you were at side events. And it was the EU presenting their strategy for going carbon neutral by 2050. And by the way, the EU managed to reduce their emissions of 22% compared to 1990 levels. And at the same time, the economy grew of 50%. So it really shows that decoupling economic growth and greenhouse gas emissions is possible and feasible. And amongst the panelists, there was the I don't know the exact role, but a big man from IKEA, the Swedish company making furniture. And I think his words were quite inspiring because he, and I don't want to make any publicity, but I mean, he gave some figures of what they're doing, and it was quite staggering. At the moment, IKEA has 70% of its energy consumption coming from renewable energies. And they're planning to be 100% from renewable energies by 2020. And they're even gaining now from the investment they made on wind farms. They've now completely recovered the investment they made, and they're making money every year out of it. Yeah, I asked him, what do you think what would be your advice for a smaller, or much smaller, in fact, enterprise who wants to go down the same path, an enterprise that doesn't have the same capacities, capital, and critical mass of such a giant as IKEA. And he pointed out that even for small businesses, investing in, I mean, you don't need to be big to be efficient. If you invest in energy efficiency, is good anyway. I mean, it's a good business case in anyway. If you spend less on consumption, I mean, your bills would be smaller. So it's good both for climate than for business. He also pointed out that by being smaller, you can even have an easier decision process that would help taking strategical decision to go in this direction in an easier way. And then he insisted on innovation. I mean, big things very often comes from very small realities, and then they turn big because they're good. So there is room for everyone to and every business to sector to take part in the climate action and actually gain out of it. And in this sense, the Lebanon Climate Act is doing exactly the right thing. Is bringing people together. It's telling them how how it can be done, accompanying them in the first steps, and um, and at the same time somehow creating a critical mass for demanding better and more ambitious policies from the public side. Because if the demand is there, then the policy has to follow. So so we're very happy to be there and to be able to contribute to this initiative, which also includes amongst its supporters the Federation of Chambers of Commerce. And in this respect, this can be a very good tool to ensure that the replicability of the initiative, both nationally and internationally, because it's done, it's good, hopefully. I mean, we will see the results, but I mean, we are going in that direction. And the fact that the chambers and other supporters are there means that it can be replicated for other sectors or at a bigger scale or in another country. As far as ClimaSat is concerned, we will continue to support it, and we will make sure that people from other countries, both this, let's say our national focal points and someone from the private sector, will attend the next sessions of the initiative, so that they can see what it is about and basically then demand for that stuff to happen at home as well for them.
Thank you, Bernardo. This is a challenging objective because you're talking of transition of countries towards low emission economies and actually enhanced climate resilience. As we are also having another challenge of cooperation, active cooperation with the private funding. How you actually see this initiative contributing to mobilization of local private finance to, let's say, reach the objective of your project to tackle climate change?
But that's not an easy question, and plus I'm not really a climate finance expert, so I won't go into the nitty gritty. But a couple of considerations on that can be shared. We, as Vahan said, the Lebanon INDC, which is at the core then, of course, of the implementation of the Paris Agreement, sets some targets like 30% reduction, no, 50% reduction of emissions by 2030 on a business as usual scenario, 15% from renewable energies, and and 3% of energy efficiency, for example. These targets are they, of course, to be met, they demand action, and they demand action also from the private sector and from the innovation of the private sector. It is indeed it's very clearly embedded in the Paris Agreement that the innovation of the private sector is it needs to be accelerated, encouraged, and funded in order for the climate targets to be met. Now, typically, the private sector is funded very often by private sources. The figures of the global landscape for climate finance say that in 2015, the overall figure for climate finance were $392 billion. Out of which 243 were from private financing, and the rest from public financing. The difference between the two is that normally well, there are many differences, but one characteristic is that the public finances normally comes, or often comes, as grants or concession or loans, whereas the private finance is normally at the higher, it costs more because there are higher risks So whoever puts the money wants to make some return. So this possibly puts a further challenge on the private sector to get access to funds, in the sense that what is proposed needs to be good, really good, because if I give you the money, I want to make sure that then I have a return, because it's a sound proposal. However, the good news is that 92% of the total financial flow is of the total private financial flow, as well as the same figure also goes for the public financial flow, is raised and spent within the country. So there is a stronger link between local funding and local spending. So this initiative, how is good to assist in the first steps of this, the first of further steps of businesses to think about the issue at a strategical way and prepare or think it the way in the sense that it's what is proposed is both economically and sound and climate relevant, and at the same time, as we said, is also able to create the demand for better financial regulations and for directing the funds towards the right way.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker and presenter is Dr. Nadine Farella. He's from Issam Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs of the American University of Beirut. The institute was established to harness the policy-related research to contribute to policymaking and international relations, and also raise the quality of public policy-related debate and decision-making, and enhance quality of interaction about, let's say, officials and civil society actors. And Dr. Nadine Farella was involved in a study which is exploring the levels of interaction between research institute and the private sector. In this case, it's industry, and also assess its level of climate change understanding. May I ask you to elaborate more on this issue? I'm aware you have a presentation. So.
Yes, I do.
Sorry.
They do. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry for taking this. What I want to talk about today is a little bit on a study that we had launched in sort of as a consequence of a discussion we had with Bahak and the team at the Ministry of Environment, where we started thinking of where we need to look, where our role would fit in within this, if you will, triangle of businesses, NGOs, and government. Where would an academic institute like ours fit in? And we found that with the Paris Agreement coming into force and industry gearing up more and more to being more involved with a green aspect of production and reduction in emissions and etc., we decided to launch this study, and we came up with a few little blurbs. The study is in its infancy, but I want to report on some initial interesting findings. What we are targeting is not only industry, we're looking at the private sector in its totality. Industry is a major contributor in terms of emissions, but then there are the banking, tourism, agriculture, etc. There's a whole wide spectrum that we want to target, and it's going to take us maybe until the next COP before we start reporting in again. So we're of Lebanon, of 144 countries that were reported in on the World Economic Forum, Lebanon ranked 119th in innovation and 93rd in its technical readiness. Fairly high up in terms of higher education and training, but our local research institutes are fairly low in their presence. And there are just a couple of initiatives that are encompassing that try to stimulate the relationship between researchers and industry. LIRA is being one, the Lebanese Industrial Research Achievement. It was set up by a couple of local industries. Initially, there was great interest in them, and then it waned. AUB, the American University of Beirut, set up this ideal platform, which is the innovation and development for academy and industry. But its focus is not really on industry, it's mainly on business and entrepreneurship. So there is a lot of collaboration in terms of between research and agriculture, research and natural resource management, some aspect of engineering in terms of infrastructure, a lot with entrepreneurship, but very little in terms of industry. In terms of research institutes in Lebanon, we've got plenty that address climate change, very few, very few that address climate change and industry. In a database that we helped develop for the Ministry of Environment in a project, we surveyed a lot of the funding that was coming in to research, to climate change research. And there were between 2004 and 2014, 62 projects that were labeled as research knowledge generation. These had a total funding of about 14 million as a minimum. There were some projects that we did not get the value, dollar value for their funding. 27 of these 62, or 43%, 44%, were conducted by research/academic institutes. And look at the funding that these were afforded, 850,000, significantly smaller portion than the 44% that they represent. And out of the 27 research projects, only 5 were directly or indirectly related to industry, and that the total there was less than 10%, about $96,000. So the objective of the study that we looked at was to assess the level of collaboration between the private sector and the research institutes in Lebanon on climate change related issues, but we started with the industrial sector. And we wanted to, at the end of the study, propose a set of actions, plans, policies that could constitute a roadmap to improve this collaboration and output. So what we did was set up a semi-structured set of interviews where initially we identified the key industries. We talked and identified the research institutes that are involved, private and public. We interviewed the decision makers in both these sets of groupings and of industries and research. And we also looked at relevant laws and regulations related to collaboration, etc. And we tried to identify gaps. And then we would propose policies. The industries that we looked at for now that we have interviewed so far are 9, mainly relying around food and beverage, mineral and non-mineral mining products, cement basically, and chemical and man-made fibers, plastics, and the pulp, paper, and paper products. Some of the initial findings that we got were centered on these questions. We looked at, and the people we talked to were the decision makers, the chief executive officers and equivalent. And they focused on knowledge of climate change. How do they know what climate change is? or do they have a decent grasp and what their contribution to climate change is as an industry, as a particular industrial establishment, and the types of impacts they see from climate change on their industry, and what knowledge they have of other industries and the impacts of those on climate change, and then the impact of climate change on those industries. We set out questions on strategies and plans, current and future, to see if they are headed in a green, if you will, direction. And we questioned them about collaborations between their establishments and research institutes, whether these research institutes are local, foreign, and what role they saw for research institutes. We tried to see what obstacles they had anticipated or had experienced, and then we looked at the role of government. And these are the initial responses. I'm not going to quantify them. I'm just going to list some of the important ones. All interviewees were aware of climate change, which is good. The contribution of their industry, then that's another issue. Most cited emissions from power generation. In Lebanon, we don't have continuous power supply, and we rely on private power generators. So most, if not all, said that it is only from power generation. Only one referred to their transportation fleet. Impact of climate change on their industry, everybody said it's reduction in water, available water. Some did relate that to loss in production, especially food processing industry. On plans and strategies, none bar one had a strategy on how to adapt or mitigate an adaptation or mitigation strategy. Many had plans related to this. Most were towards moving towards renewable energy. Photovoltaics were by far the most common. A couple had biomass, use of biomass to generate power. Others used biogas from waste they generate as an industry. Some others said that they would change their operation to reduce energy costs and thereby reduce emissions. On collaboration with research institutes, nearly all had collaborations with local institutes, but none were climate related. Most were on product improvement and product cost reduction and production cost reduction. Nearly all looked at research institutes for testing materials, testing material strength, etc. Most also thought that research institutes would be a source of trainees that they can come in and work for them. There was very limited interaction with foreign research institutes, and the perception of the role of research institutes, and I want to stress that these are all perceptions of the industrialists themselves. They said that the role of research institutes is to improve on production efficiency, to raise awareness on climate change and emissions from their industry, to introduce innovative technologies into the industries so that they can achieve emission targets, reduce production costs. And somewhere, only one respondent, the same, they are related to a larger groupings, said that the role of research is to conduct industry relevant research. On obstacles to collaboration, industries had no vision practically on, or they said that the major problem is that industries have no vision or initiative for such collaboration, and that the research is not directed, that's being conducted by these institutes, is not directed towards industrial production, and that research institutes are not reaching out to industries. There is a problem of data sharing. Many of the industries cannot or do not want to share data because it's proprietary and they're afraid of losing competitiveness. The elements in red are, I highlighted them because they are more towards obstacles that are aligned with government, the role of government. Government does not fund such activities. The government does not have the will to facilitate such collaboration, and there is a general lack of regulations and laws that would impose on industries measures and actions that would make them look for climate change related research. On role of government, all said government has no role. And some had said that the government should put in place a policy to encourage industry research interaction. And then some had envisaged a role for financing and funding. Some of the conclusions that we got of the set of questions that we asked, and we can summarize them in the next 2 slides. Most have basic knowledge, as I said, but this is only centered that climate change would raise temperatures and reduce water availability. Of the industries that we talked to, the cement industry was the most knowledgeable and about climate change and its impacts, but that's because this industry is part of a worldwide set of industries. So they had the connection to a larger conglomerate. And also the others that there's another big paper and plastic industry that has factories in Lebanon and in the US, and they also had good insight on this. Few had insight on how useful or on how CC impacts would affect their operations, mainly the cost of their operations. Nearly all thought the industrial sector in Lebanon is too small to have any significant contribution to climate change, and everybody was in every establishment was in its own silo. They didn't know what was going on in other industries. Again, this point that foreign industries with foreign outreach had advanced view of climate change and role of research. Some of the views on research that was quite enlightening was there's very limited knowledge of what research should do for them. They didn't know what research can do for them. This is important. And the partnerships they envisioned was to improve products and the greening of their products, not in the process of how they can reduce their emissions. And the view that they had of researchers was that these people take too long and are focused too narrowly on an issue to help with the immediate needs of the industries. Thus, the industrialists looking for consultants, where they gather information for them and give them answers, quick answers to what they need right now. Hence, you can see this with a look that there's no strategy that they have, for a long-term strategy on tackling climate change and its impacts. Also, that what they voiced as an expression was the research needs to be directed towards production. There is very little research on that in Lebanon. And the industrialists looked at research and development departments to work on quality assurance and control and process monitoring rather than anything else. The view of role of research institutes, again, here I might be repeating myself, but it is focused, this is what they thought, that research institutes should focus on awareness, reducing carbon footprint, and again, this is the source of trainees. They thought that research institutes should provide them with trainees to work, and these institutes should provide them with means of getting certifications, ISO and similar. But some also said that these institutes may provide them a roadmap for cleaner production and better environment. In general, there is a great willingness to cooperate with institutes, and relationship with researchers, whatever it exists, is very, very informal, and the researchers are often hired as consultants rather than researchers. And again, they want testing to be the focus of the research. Finally, the consensus was there are lack of experts in fields relevant to local industries, lack of industry-relevant research, and whenever they both parties embark on a common project, they quickly lose interest, and these projects end up fizzling out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very useful, and it also gives a sort of quite valuable look from, let's say, bottom up, how a different stakeholders' opinion is about climate change issue, and also, of course, needed changes, which can be, as you said, costly, and there is certain amount of, let's say, maybe even a fear of doing these changes. And hence, let me ask. And we heard very nice from the Lebanon Climate Act initiative, how the results of your study may contribute to let's say, improve or enhance this Lebanon Climate Act, because I found some elements of your study very much relevant and connecting to.
It is, the major thing is that what we're finding is there's a point of entry for research in Lebanon to help industry or the private sector, because the main concern of private sector is to reduce costs. And it is for the researchers to address this issue by looking at the process strain, the production of the process strain in production or in business management or in putting out any product, and identifying areas where research can be done to reduce costs, because not all industries know where things can happen for them, where they can reduce costs. All look at emissions, but then some of the people that we talked to looked at, for example, reducing emissions by reducing fuel use through introducing valves in their certain valve controls in their liquid flows, and or insulation, etc. This is where we can come in. Or when looking at biomass, this is where researchers can come in and address these issues. So these are places where we can identify and provide local solutions, whereas others cannot provide the local solution or the local access to local knowledge.
Again, thank you very much. Very interesting. And let me present our last, certainly not least speaker, Mr. Balduki. He's a manager of low emission capacity building program. That's a global initiative to support national climate change mitigation efforts, low verification, which is again also discussed a lot with under the convention, for example. And I'm aware, I will correct me again if I'm wrong, that you include in your program some 25 participating countries at the moment, and actually you strengthen technical and institutional capacities at the national level or country level, and also facilitating coordination between public and private sector, very relevant to our today topic. And as I said, it is a system for measuring, reporting, verification of proper actions, and also design and adoption of mitigation sector by selected industries. Yeah. So from your experience, and I know you have a long ongoing experience within let's say, also needs of developing countries from your good old TNA times, what is your UNDP's experience in engaging private sector? And this is from perspective of UNFCCC, this is still challenging, as I said. So we would like to hear from your experience, as you are much more present in the country levels than us. And again, you have, I'm sure, concrete feedbacks on engaging private sector in climate change mitigation and adaptation actions.
Thank you, Vladimir, and good afternoon, everyone. I think a lot already has been said. My previous speakers, I actually liked the angle of the research that was carried out on how the research centers could also be involved in the private sector initiatives to support mitigation actions on the ground. We conducted not a similar study, but a study along the lines of understanding where are the key challenges of financing mitigation actions. We commissioned the study to the Center for Climate Change and Policy in London. They conducted a survey, not necessarily among all the private sector representatives, like it was done in Lebanon, but a combination of the projects in the ground and also with financiers and private sectors as well. And one of the key questions was what was one of the main challenges, and there was a number of challenges that were identified, but finance, access to finance, was identified as the main challenge to support the implementation of mitigation action. And when it comes to define what that means in terms of accessing finance, the person who conducted the study came up with this is a chicken and egg problem, in which you see political commitment and business interest actually requires finance. And then when you go to raising finance from private sector, as it has been said also before, it requires a policy framework that will incentivize investment. And then when you look from the donor's perspective, the donors requires also policy visions and specific proposals that provides confidence and that the country has a clear understanding on the path to low carbon development. So when you look at what starts first, and it's our understanding, and I think that perhaps everybody agrees, that the policies have to come first. They provide the basis and the framework for create the conditions for private investments to come in and for private sector to engage. So this actually requires a political commitment and presenting the perspective of finance in terms of linking it with development and at the country level. And I think that's critical. So it's not divorced from what the priorities are in the countries. You're looking at how you are prioritizing investment by looking at also at your development needs in the countries. This will also require building the technical and human capacities to be able to access the finance and manage this finance that will come in place. Design the policies and incentives that means most likely public finance to start the finance as an incentive. And then the implementations to mobilize the private investment will probably require looking at mixtures of finance sources. So when we also talk in this study, also talk to donors and investors, and there was a clear message coming from them that availability of finance and technology was not necessarily the key barrier, but it was actually the lack of financeable and implementable projects. And that's very important, because if we're saying that money is out there and the technologies are available, and that the problem is that there are not enough solid financial proposals, then we can focus efforts in looking at how we can improve projects and initiatives to be able to access finance from different sources. And that's related again to the institutional and human capacity in the first place, but also looking at the enabling environments, enabling conditions, and that will probably involve de-risking going through, and Lebanon is trying to also look at how de-risking investment through policy framework will be able to attract and provide incentives for funding. Some of the challenges, and I think were related to the previous presentations as well, that were identified in engaging the private sector, finance different mitigation actions. The one is drive for profits risk that was mentioned before. Sometimes also the conflict of interest and credibility in terms of sustainability of the investment. When we look at energy efficiency and renewable energy, is the difficulty in competing with like core energy, high carbon returns investment. That's another area of a challenge. In many cases, when these initiatives are presented as a GHG emission reduction initiative, they are seen as a burden rather than opportunity. So I think something that we need to learn from when we're talking to the private sector is not about reducing investment, it's about how to make processes more efficient, to become more competitive as an entry point to engage more proactively with the private sector, basically speaking the private sector language and the interest of the private sector. There is also, and I think that's probably reflected somehow in the findings of the previous study, when most of the respondents apparently said there is no role for the government, and I think it's related to the challenge it was quoted here as mistrust of government policies and programs. So there is always this mistrust about, well, what does the government want from us now? They want to tax us, that kind of immediate thinking. There's also the CDM experience with very mixed results. In some cases successful, in a lot of cases not very successful. And then what happened to the CDM so have created, contributed to this mistrust of government engagement. And in the case of the regulatory aspects that will need to be put in place, I think there is a feeling that they will want to be involved in designing those instruments as well. So it's not imposed on them, but they have an opportunity to contribute to the discussion. There is also limited capacity on both sides, not only from the institution, but also in the private sector, as also was presented in the previous research, that will need to be addressed, those capacity gaps. And then there is the time constraint and the limited attention that the attention that will be needed, the efforts that will be needed to actually put into engaging with the private sector. Some of the lessons that we can describe from here is make clear that the benefits for investments and a convincing argument. So it's that it comes at the beginning. So reliable, specific, and transparent policy framework, clear structure of financial incentives, measures removing barriers to finance, to investments, long-term commitment from governments and clarity on financing and returns for different interventions, and who are to be engaged, to identify clearly the private sector, more specifically who will be targeted and who will benefit from engaging in mitigation. And then more like cross-cutting areas is educate and communicate, speak of the language of the private sector and to their issues. Identify the co-benefits for companies. I think one critical element that could also be included in the discussion is the issue of corporate responsibility. And I think a lot of private sector are actually very keen to look at corporate responsibility as an entry point also to contribute. There is an example in Uganda. We were developing some ANAMA, National Appropriate Mitigation Action, to provide electricity to rural schools through with renewable energy. And one company, a sugarcane production company, was interested, and they're themselves funding more than 100 schools to have energy access, and is aligned with the corporate responsibility they're trying to put in place. Very important, avoid raising unrealistic expectations. I think when we approach sometimes the private sectors, we're not clear ourselves of what we are engaging with, and develop trust for working together. So those are some of the key areas I will highlight. With adaptation, it's also even more complicated. We're probably talking about small and medium-sized enterprises at household level, small production areas in agriculture, in the poorest country. So the scheme of engaging with engaging private sector at much smaller scale also require a lot of policy incentives, engagement with large communities, and education in terms of the opportunities and the benefits of bringing small resources to support community level adaptation projects and to reduce climate risk and make communities less vulnerable.
Thank you very much, Yamil. And Before I ask our audience if they have any questions to one of the presenters, let me say that this issue on availability of finance or notion, which you mentioned, and availability of technology not being a main barrier, right? We're facing the same, and hence, if you look at the Paris Agreement and the decision to operationalize Paris Agreement in the terms of technology, to implement, let's say, the results of TNA is a challenge, and it's not because they would not be responsive to countries' needs and priorities. Yes, they are. They are very well responsive. That the problem is how to shape these country priorities. Let's say even the technology action plans, to have a portfolio of sound and bankable projects. Therefore, it's a lot of thinking about some sort of. And if somebody could help, have a helping hand, case by case, per developing countries, per LDC, and have a sort of like a project preparation facility on that, in that sort of fashion, that could run, in my humble opinion, for decades. There's so much we have to offer in terms of projects which are prepared, but they are still not bankable. So the understandable level that the investment could be put in a project. So this is some further additional technical, let's say, capacity building skills could be like elaborated together with the government. So thank you again. Please let me ask our audience whether they would have any questions to our distinguished set of speakers. If there is no question, I have one question actually to my colleague Vahaten on. I know that in Lebanon, if I look to your INDCs, you have set a target by 2030 of 15% of CO2 emission reduction, and this is unconditionally, which is nice and challenging. However, Lebanon committed to reduce up to 30% of its CO2 emission conditional to finance, technical and capacity building support. Now, looking again at the Paris, we have some enhancement of the financial mechanism under the UNFCCC, and a couple of countries are already trying to access finance of the so-called GCF, Green Climate Fund. And I want to ask whether Lebanon or other countries in the region, do you think they will apply for, let's say, a readiness program of the GCS in terms of helping them to looking on that further target, and maybe helping there to get additional funding package? Because I heard that from some countries, let's say in Africa, that they're already thinking to prepare a proposal to the GCF. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Obviously, yes, we are thinking of applying to the readiness. However, we still haven't decided on with which partner we will be doing that. There's a set of different institutions who would be able to assist us in that. But we're also trying to look at different institutions who would also help us in prioritizing the different actions that we have, and optimize primarily the mitigation or adaptation options that would bring in the most reduction with the least amount of money. So that's a priority concern for us that we will be looking at.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, let me thank again our kind presenters, and thank you very much. And let's stay in touch in this very interesting and challenging topic. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You have the microphone. There's some refreshments outside, please, if you want to join us. Well, we'd be really happy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my cup is finished now.
Mine too. I'm actually traveling tomorrow.